Welcome back. We're very pleased to begin our panel presentation. If I could invite Claudine Louis and Jeannette Sinclair to join Sharon Goulet.
Hi, Claudine. Good to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having us.
And Jeannette. Oh yes, there are new doctors. Okay. So Claudine, Jeannette, and Sharon are going to share a 20-minute presentation each with us, and then we'll have some discussion at our tables. So I will invite Claudine to please begin. Yeah, unless you're more comfortable sitting down. Yeah, sure you can.
Be like Narcisse. Good morning, everyone. Kakautamskatnaut. I'm honored and grateful to be sharing with you some information and just building upon what our elder Narcisse Blood talked about, this notion of reconnection and healing. That has basically been my journey in this learning journey. And so next Wednesday, I'll be completing the final leg of this educational academic journey anyway. And I'll be walking across the stage at the University of Alberta to pick up that piece of paper. So I want to honor the elders in the room, the traditional knowledge holders. Those groups of people are really our first PhDs in our communities. And so I recognize and honor that. I want to thank our elder, Bob Cardinal, for starting us off in a good way, and for all the other elders and the traditional knowledge holders that have participated in making sure that we continue to do the work, the good work that needs to be done in our communities. I want to recognize the organizers and the planning committee because I know the time and energy it takes to put forward and bring forward a vision as great like this. So it's good to see that all the tables are full, and hopefully we'll have some opportunity to share and talk with one another. And I want to honor and recognize the people from the Enoch Cree Nation for allowing us to have the space to come together, even though we come from many different places in the country. You know, it's nice to come together in a group so that we can have one heart and one mind. And I just want to recognize the young children and the youth that are here. I think it's really important to have our children and our youth participate so that they have those memories and they can recall on those times when they need them in the future. So thank you for everyone to be here today. Hi, hi. So I'm wanting to share with you my research journey, and hopefully I'll be able to do it in 20 minutes. That's the, I guess, the task. So it's important, of course, to honor and recognize the community that I come from, and I'm from the Maskwacis Cree territory. We just reclaimed our name in January. We were previously known as Hobima, or Hobama is actually the correct Dutch term. And I dare not go into the explanation of that. Thank goodness my father isn't sitting in here in this room, because he definitely makes sure that I go back and say the correct oral history on how that name came to be. But traditionally our name was the Maskwacis Cree territory, so Bear Hills. And I'm from the largest of the 4 bands in Maskwachis. I'm from the Samson Cree Nation. And in the 80s, we reclaimed our name. So it's really the âniskótapânak community, Land of the Willows. And I'm from the English translation is Maskwachis, but it's really pronounced Maskwachis. And I have 72 first cousins. I tease my sister-in-law who has 2. So I'm related to the majority of the family groupings in the community, and of course extending into other areas. But the stories that I remember growing up were our people moved from the 4 lakes: Dry Meat Lake, Buffalo Lake, Gull Lake, and Pigeon Lake. And in reserve formation time, which was 1899, stories in my family go back beyond that date. So within my family, we continue to share those kinds of stories about how our people came to be. But the pictures on top there that you see are the pictures of the 4 chiefs that were sitting in the early 1900s. And that has come to be a reminder of who we are in our community. So I'm from the Maskwachis clan on my father's side. My great-grandmother, performed the buffalo dance. And before the ceremonial ban in the early 1900s, she was the last one to complete that. And she was the last one to lead that. And so in my research journey, uncovering that and recognizing that and honoring that, a lot of Indigenous scholars today talk about education being the new buffalo. And so my work is still on that journey. I'm just doing it in a different form. And so that was a great awareness for me, and I offer that for you today to consider too. As a researcher, coming to know and work with the idea of Indigenous Research Methodology really formed the framework for uncovering the information that I'm here to share with you. So honoring natural law was a repetitive instillment by the traditional knowledge holder and the elders that I worked with to remind me that that still exists today. So knowing that winter is a time of introspection, spring is for new growth, summer is the experience of the full expression of life, and fall is a time to let go. But also knowing that I'm âniskótapânak, I'm a Cree woman, and so there are 4 parts to myself, and that was really where my journey took me. So âniskótapânak, KIHEW, my Cree name, one of them anyway, is Eagle Woman. So I asked and really took a look at this notion of working with who I was and using the idea of a soaring eagle approach to learning and to research. So soaring high enough to be able to see what I'm working with, but always coming back to myself. And then going out again to explore and take a look. Because sometimes when you're dealing with research, and information and data, it could be a little bit overwhelming. So having that ability to fly high enough to see what I'm working with was really important. And, you know, there's time that is necessary to recognize the flight. So these are eagles actually in my backyard here, and they would come and visit me, and they continue to. I had the opportunity and the great fortune, I guess, as a graduate student to be a participant in a Cure research project, and some of you are in the room here know about this. Jeannette and I were graduate students who participated in the Healing Through Language and Culture, and that was a SHIRT grant, and that provided us the opportunity to go back and investigate. And my journey specifically took me back into looking at the Indian residential schools. So what our elder here shared with us, Narcisse, shared with us the powerful story of the Indian residential school. That story is still being uncovered and unraveled in our communities, and having to go back and deal with that and to address it in a good way. And in my own journey, I talked a lot about my maternal side, and I shared the story, and it wasn't my intention, but to date, I have made over 60 presentations on the Indian residential school. So it wasn't something that I had intended to do, but it was something that I have found I've been called to share information on. And so I realized the importance of that information and going back to continue to talk about it. And as a researcher, I was rooted and grounded by traditional knowledge holders and elders. And so there's a picture of the traditional knowledge holder and the elder that I worked with. So the Healing Through Language and Culture took me back to investigate, and like I said, it wasn't my intention to go back and take a look at all the photographs, but they have been very powerful, and they tell a story that is deeply emotive. It's very difficult to go back there and not feel any type of emotion. And so there's a need to honor and address that emotion in a good way, and to find spaces to do that. And in the work that we're doing at the University of Alberta with the Aboriginal education course that we're teaching to pre-service teachers, we know that some of those classroom spaces are not enough to help students resolve and work through the issue of the Indian residential schools. So we need more. And these are just other photographs. And as an Indigenous researcher, it's always about coming back to the self. It's not about taking a look out there and having that information be out there. It's about having that information make sense to me and how it's transformed me. And that has been the work that I have done. So in the sea of girls there is a picture of my grandmother on my mother's side. Her name was Moniasquil. So in Cree, that means white woman. And she was like the talk of the town in Maskwachis, because she was a little English and French girl who was adopted by Cree elders and medicine people. And they taught her those ways. And on her deathbed, she refused to speak anything but Cree. So taking a look at her, she was the inspiration for me completing my work, because she's since passed on to the spirit world. But what would make her be so committed to Cree ways of knowing and being? And because she maintained that right until her death. And then on the right of that is a picture of my children's grandfather. And he had so my children's grandfathers went to the Old Sun residential school in Gleason, and he received an award, the Tom Longboat Award, which was a prestigious award given to an individual who excelled in a sporting capacity. And he was on his way to the Olympics. So if it wasn't for that opportunity afforded in that Indian residential school, the notion of competitive sporting opportunities were provided. Because I was always asked, were there any good stories? And so, you know, having to go back and investigate and take a look at that too was important. So on the right is the picture of my grandmother, Moniasco, and in the middle is a picture of my mother, late Nancy Yellowbird, and then the only surviving member is my Aunt Sophie Bruno. So these women were the teachers in my life about the information that I'm going to share with you, because I thought growing up everyone knew this model right here. So my graduate studies journey has given me and afforded me the opportunity to name an ancient concept, and it's named after my late mother, Omisimaw. That was her Cree name. So it's a privilege that the academic route has provided me, because this knowing, this way of knowing and being has always been there and has sustained us as Aboriginal women in our community. When young girls become women, they are taught this model in an informal manner. There's discussion, there's storytelling, there's explanations about what each of these parts of the self mean, and a recognition that it continues to go on because we still have our moon lodges. Those are still ongoing in our communities. So I just thought growing up, everyone knew this. And coming back to complete grad studies, I realized it wasn't the case. So that was the important piece. And these are just documents that I've had to work through and uncover, working with the treaty tickets. You know, that's an actual proof that the past system happened in Canada. We had Indian residential school experiences, you know, the idea of reserves, you know, those notices. Those were, this knowledge wasn't available to me as a student. So coming back and working with them was really important. So my question was, how could it be used? And the answer, of course, well, it continued to be used and has sustained us. So my own journey has been working with many different sources. So photographs, research circles, journals, dreams, those are important. And the themes that came forward were fourfold. So the first one is Wakotwin, and that's a very ancient concept that is very broad. But recognizing that, you know, there's this connection to ancestors and land, and that middle picture there is the picture of my great-grandmother who lived to be 104 years old. She was the individual to last perform the buffalo dance, so having her come and help me. Knowing that we've survived cultural and linguistic genocide, and in the working with the traditional knowledge holders, they say that there's a gift to be gathered from any difficult situation. So, you know, just reminding ourselves about those important teachings. And the other thing is knowing that everyone learns differently, and that it's important to, as we work through this, recognize that we have challenges, but to be able to accept the challenge and to stand up to it and to address it. So that's why we're all here today. It's an example. So my own research has added to introducing some terms: forced religiosity, heart work, rediscovering relationship building, which is what, you know, Narcisse talked about, and reclaiming parenthood. And then I've identified some specific areas for teaching, for curriculum, for research. But again, going back to the self, it's important to bring it back to me. And I think what a difference it would make if our students would start saying these things. I'm resilient, I'm connected, I'm open to learning experiences, and I'm willing to accept the challenge, and I can grow and experience the four parts of myself. How different would our classrooms be? How different would our Aboriginal children be if they started saying these things? So just some final thoughts, because there's this gap that exists between academia and Indigenous knowledge systems. and the challenge that exists there, and the amount of work that is necessary and important. So I'm thankful to be asked to participate in this journey, and I realize there's much work to be done, but I guess I want to leave you all with this question. So how can this model be used to help understand and explore identity, and what are some examples? So I'll leave that as a final thought for you to think on during the rest of the conference. And because I work with women in my community, I have shared this quote with many different people, and recognizing that a nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. Then it's finished, no matter how brave its warriors or how strong its weapons. Recognizing the role and strength of Aboriginal women, it continues and will prevail. Hi, hi.
Good morning, everyone. I wasn't sure if somebody was going to come up here or not, but I always, to me, this is a place of privilege just to sit next to my good friend and colleague, Claudine Louis, who I consider to be a natural teacher. And I listened to her a couple days ago doing her presentation, and I knew I was going to be in good company, that I would follow her. My name is Jeannette Sinclair. I'm originally from northern Alberta, the Lesser Slave Lake area, Sagao Cree, so northern Bush Cree. I'm Nihiao, so similar to Claudine, only not Plains Cree. I was given a name maybe in the 90s, I can't remember exactly when. The late Peter O'Cheese. I don't know where my good friend Elder Jean Aquash is at the moment, but I got my name at that time, and it was Osao Migwan Niapit, Sitting Yellow Feather. And it was part of my journey in reconnecting to my own culture, our own traditional ways of being, which is something that's been a long journey, but it's something that I'm really grateful to be on. So the title of my presentation is In the Footprints of Our Ancestors, Exploring the Reconnection to My Cree Ancestors, âniskótapânak, and Ancestral Land in the Lesser Slave Lake area. And one of the things that I've discovered over time that's really critical is the connection to land. And I want to acknowledge that the land that we are sitting on, standing on, being on, as the Indigenous people to this territory, the Enoch First Nation, and the other ancestors. I always remember them because of my work, the other ancestors who are also on this land. I want to mention how powerful that presentation was this morning, the Elder Narcisse Blood did. I saw it yesterday as well on campus. There were so many pieces of what he talked about and what was highlighted in that work that I could directly relate to in my own work. And one of the things, I'm going to just read a couple notes that I made when he talked about what happens when our stories are minimized. It puts down our way of knowing. And my research is so much about that. And, you know, what are the consequences when you ignore the knowledge that was already there? And talking about storytelling, it's our way of knowing, and it's in the research. And in particular, he talked about it being told in a way that you feel and experience the story, and that's why it stays with you. So I will tell you, I'm not a storyteller, but my role in my work was to go back to our past, to our history in our family, and to bring that information forward. And it's for the youth, for tomorrow. The people always say that, you know, our young people are leaders of the future. But you know what? They're leaders now. And I think it's always important to pay attention to what they have to say, because they can also guide us. Okay, so don't mean to get preachy, but sometimes I can't help it. Okay, so here as Claudine pointed out, one of the critical pieces in doing Indigenous research is to locate yourself. So I've done that. There's several scholars who write about this, that it's important to locate yourself. And it's not just who you are and where you're from, but it goes deeper than that. And the more you know about your own history, to me, it helps to strengthen in locating and situating yourself. So I'm, as I said, from the Lesser Slave Lake area, northern Alberta. And this area here, Big Point, in the northern part of the lake, I have never been there yet. Access is an issue, but that's where my kukum, Agath Sinclair, is from. Her family was all from that area. Her father, Michelle Coutre, had land there. My mom's family is from this area, Canuso, Swan River First Nation. And my dad, Sinclair, on the Sinclair and Hamlin side of the family, it's on this side, on the eastern side of Slave Lake. So as I point out on top there, Mitsue is also another area that our ancestors had land. Boy, I'm not very good at multitasking here. Okay, here we go. So many Native cultures teach that we carry the memories of our ancestors in our physical being. As such, we are immediately connected to those who have gone before us. That's Anderson's work. That's my great-grandmother, Marie Chelafu. And that's about 1950, and that's my oldest brother, Gordon, who did the research in our family to connect us to getting our status back in 1990. So the motivation for research, part of it came from listening to elders and older people talk about the importance of knowing who you are, knowing where you come from, knowing your history. And when I talk about elders in my work, I use the late Joe Couture's definition when he talks about them being oral historians, guardians of the secrets, interpreters of the life of the people, as unusual teachers and way-showers to the people. Elders are the keepers of traditional Indigenous knowledge. So I was always uncomfortable when I would hear that, when people would say, know your history, know who you are, you know, because I knew inside I didn't have a strong understanding of our own history. So that's what my work was about. It was about recognizing that the invisibility of our people. So I was raised in the town of Slave Lake itself. At that time, in the 50s, it was, you know, about a 50-50 Native and non-Native. And we never saw ourselves in the textbooks, as most of you or many of you may be in the same position. There was that, you know, either stereotypes or absence. In the local historical texts, there was minimal presence of our people. It was always about the pioneers, the white people who came, the heroes. Those are the people. Streets are named after those people. Our people are devalued. Our histories are buried. In the archival photographs, when Claudine was talking about the Healing Through Language and Culture project that we did a lot of research on archival photographs. So many of those photographs would have unnamed people. There would be like one photo I remember that really hit home to me was a picture of an old Native woman, and it said something like, and she was standing in front of a Red River cart. And it was something like Indian squaw and Red River cart, or something to that effect. Or maybe it didn't say Red River, but it said cart. But that would get to me. It was like, we are invisible. We're not even important enough to be named. We'd look at some of those photos of the priests. It'd be priest so-and-so and Indian family or something. It was just like, who are these people? Like, why are we not important enough to be named? So a lot of that was motivation for me. Also, I talk about our people as being environmental stewards, that we don't leave visible landmarks, certainly not in our area, in the Slave Lake area. In fact, to the point where we have a burial site for our ancestors in the provincial park in Slave Lake, in the Marten River Provincial Park, and there's nothing there that indicates that's where our ancestors are. There's a snow fence, some of it broken down, but that's where some of our ancestors lie. So I guess it's obvious that, I would have issues of invisibility, being silenced. So the photo on the right, that's what it looks like. That's one of the photos of the area where our ancestors are. So as I said, what I was uncovering in my work was the disconnection between our histories, our ancestors, our language, our culture, our land, our community, and the lack of sense of belonging. And part of that has to do with identity as well, in the labels that were given. As a child, I thought of myself as Indian, because my mom would always say, always be proud to be Indian. Don't ever be ashamed to be Indian. Thought we were always Indians. And then as I got older, then you realize, okay, Apitaugusan, you're actually a half-breed, Then Métis became the common term. Then it became Bill C-31, So you wonder why there's these issues of identity. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to look back to the connection to our ancestors, because nobody can take away your bloodline. When you know where you come from, when you know who your ancestors are, no matter whether or not government comes back and takes away our status, as they have to two of my brothers and my late father, my late father died without his status in 2005, and my two brothers to this day still don't have their status because they were revoked. So you have that feeling of, well, then who are we? It's that constant thing. I don't think you give somebody else the power to say who you are. It's important to know who you are inside. So my work was, it was a painful experience. And so I talk about my work being motivated by my belief that deepening the understanding of our own histories, of our own Indigenous knowledge, our own ways of knowing and being, will serve to strengthen us individually and collectively. So that's my kokum, Agath Kutre, 1964. That's the same year she died that year. And the little one that she's holding there, that's my late brother Kevin, who also died that same year. So how do we as Aboriginal people, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in Canada, how do we learn about our own histories when our pedagogical foundations of oral traditions are disrupted, damaged, or destroyed by a variety of barriers, losses, and other challenges? So some of the questions that I was asking is, what is our history? Where are our stories? Who are our ancestors? What are their stories? Where did they come from? Where did they live? Where are they buried? What happened to their land? So I had pieces of that from my brother's research, from stories in our family, but not a real clear sense of understanding. So that research journey took me to that place of uncovering those things. And so, as Gregory Kaheti says, the Indigenous educators have to be willing to turn history inside out and upside down. And it is the voices of Indigenous peoples long silenced, but now creating a new discourse which will tell a fuller story. So that was part of what I was trying to do. Okay, I think I've got 5 minutes. 8 minutes. Okay, right on. Okay, so Dr. Cora Weber-Pilwax is my mentor and was my supervisor for my doctoral work, as she was for Claudine. And so she came up with 7 underlying principles for Indigenous Research Methodology. And as a lot of you Indigenous scholars here in the room, and non-Indigenous scholars, but our people, there are many aspects to Indigenous research, but these are the ones that are kind of looked to be as a seminal work that many of us draw on. And in particular, I was looking at the foundation of research as lived Indigenous experience. And there's many aspects to these principles, but I just wanted to point out basically what I was following. And I also draw on Margaret Kovach's work when she talked about using first-person narratives, so the stories, our own stories, with expository writing and analysis. And she says, this is a research story. It's situated in a time, place, and context. Although the narrative style is present, the writing often shape-shifts to another form. Like Sweetgrass, it has 3 braids comprising 3 writing styles: expository, analytical, and narrative. So I will say that I'm a bit of a chicken in most things that I do in life. I'm more comfortable to be in the background. I do not like to be in the spotlight. So I struggled with my work so much that, as Lisa Burke-Bearskin will know here, many times we've had research circles as women, primarily in our groups, and I would almost inevitably cry, and so did she, I'll add. But so much of it is our work good enough? It's always the measuring up. Do we measure up? We got to work so hard, you know, healing, connecting to our communities. We're mothers, we're daughters, we're sisters, we're aunties. All of the work that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then you still have that burden. Am I good enough? Is my work good enough? So there was Indigenous scholar, Lorna Williams, who we had the privilege to sit with a while back. And I remember her saying to me, she's a very strong woman, and I was uncomfortable with her strength. And she said to me, you need to write about being invisible. What I hear you talk about is autoethnography. You need to tell your story. And I was like resisting. I kept trying to talk, and she just put her hand up. She didn't want to hear about anything anymore. She said, you go write. And I was thinking, wow, she's got her nerve. I was getting angry. And then I thought, you know what? Out of respect for her, she knows. But I was resisting because I was scared, because there was pain there. But that pain is what gave me courage. So that was about writing our stories. That was about connecting to my ancestors, to my grandmothers, to sitting with them, sitting with not just the archival data, but I would pray all the time when I wrote. I would pray. I would make them tea. I would smudge. I would make them food and sit with them. So what would happen for me is that I would cry, and I would have a really hard time, and I just keep praying, stay with me, to the ancestors, because it's like I wanted the guidance. If I was going to go the other way, that research wouldn't have been meaningful to me. But so as I connected to my grandmothers and my great-grandmothers, and this is not to say I didn't connect with the males in the family, but there was a need. I was pulled in that direction. And realized that my kukum, Agath, was born in 1894. Her mother died in 1898, a year before Treaty 8 was signed. And there was consequences to, that I won't get into, but she was married to a James Sinclair, and that's him on the screen there. That's James, that's Agath, my kukum. This is her mother, Madeline Hamlin. And the point that I'm raising is that he died in the flu. So this reminded me of when you were talking about smallpox, Narcisse, was that in our area it was the flu. They called it the Spanish flu, you know, blame it on the Spanish. It doesn't matter, but I've done some reading about it where it maybe come from the States. But so all of our people were being wiped out in our communities. So my kukum lost her husband and her dad on the same day, November 12th, yesterday, 96 years ago. She lost them. A couple of days later, she lost her 10-month-old baby. And then a few days after that, she lost her father-in-law. So 4 deaths in 6 days. She was 24 years old. She had other children she had to provide for. I would grieve. I was grieving the pain that she had carried all her life. And I never knew, and I couldn't talk to her because she only spoke Cree, and I didn't speak Cree. So, you know, when you don't have your language, there's many, for some of us, it's extremely painful. And, you know, in circle, many times when John Cryer, one of the elders who has guided my work, I would always cry whenever it came my turn to talk. It was because I was carrying that pain. And I never wanted to cry. I was always like, oh God, you know, please don't let me cry. But I always did. But I had to. And it's like what my work was about. I had to write the stories of my grandmothers. I had to write about many things. I did a document analysis, even about where they were buried. My ancestors were buried. Because it would say, you'd get 5 different sources, and they would all say something different. And each one thinks their material is accurate. Doesn't matter if it's official, it's stamped. And there's issues of access when you're doing genealogy research. You can't access certain records anymore from the oblate records. You can't access government records. And partly why I know that is because I have some of those records we can't access anymore. So there's all kinds of issues that are complicated, and I touch on them in my work. And I wasn't actually planning on talking about them here today, but that's just how it goes. I mean, sometimes you need to talk about the things that are uncomfortable. I just want to draw quickly, as we were researching our own histories, our story, reclaiming our stories, this is a photo of Charlie Jackson in the Slave Lake area, a really good Cree speaker, looks like a Monial. His mom was Indian, his dad was a white guy, but really grounded in his knowledge and was sharing stories with us, knows that our ancestors are buried in that park, and pointed out the areas, where they are. So my work is about acknowledging our ways of knowing. It's not just about whoever makes it official by having the documents. It is about what are our stories. So this was a bit of my journey in reconnecting, was the archival research, lived experience, stories, narratives, photographs, maps, traditional knowledge, ceremonies, and literature. And the teepee there, that's from the entrance ranch. Our good friend Jimmy O'Cheese would share teachings with us. And right, the other thing was the sweat lodge frame that we had when we did our ceremonies in Slave Lake. So this slide will be available. I think I'm running out of time here, but this was a flag that we put up in the early 90s, the Union Jack. The elders were told in ceremony that that's what our family needs to do. So I'm not going to go through all of the details of the text. As I said, it's in my work. It can be, if anybody's interested, you can connect with me. This is my late great-grandfather, Donald Sinclair. This is my late sister in the parkland in Slave Lake. This is my son. So this is about acknowledging our own ways of teaching, our own ways of knowing, and that the work is for them. So this for me was a journey of reconnection and healing, and I will never say I've fully reconnected, because there's lots of more work to do, and there's certainly a lot of more healing to do for myself as an individual and our people. So that's a picture of my father, and as I said, some of the ancestors. So as I said, my work is about reconnecting the past, the present, and it's for the future generations. So those are just some of our family members. These are the acknowledgements. That's my brother, Gordon, the oldest one in our family, who did most of this research in our family, and just all the people who provided support and funding to my research over the years. So anyway, I'd like to just say one more thing, if I have just a few seconds, just about the research question that I'd like to leave you with is, so how do we make that reconnection to our histories and to our ancestors? How do we strengthen our identity as Indigenous people in Canada in light of the layers and categories that some of us have experienced since the status of our ancestors were first branded by the government around the signing of the treaties in Alberta? The colonial and racialized history of Canada has led to many Aboriginal identities, and thus of histories and communities. Not all of us fit a formula, and not all of us fit only one formula. So with that, I'm grateful for the guidance with my own ancestors, and with all of the people who connected with me during my time at the university. So thank you very much for listening. Hi.
Good afternoon. It's almost afternoon. I'm just going to wait for my slide to go up. But thank you very much for inviting me to Edmonton. I'm originally from Winnipeg, but I work in Calgary. I'm Métis from, like I said, originally from Winnipeg. And I'm going to talk to you this morning, early afternoon, about a little bit different kind of piece of work that I've been involved with. I also want to acknowledge Ralph Boder, who's standing in the back of the room there. He was a big part of the work that I'm going to talk about, as well as a large group of elders that played a big role. So I've been working for the municipal government, so the City of Calgary, for about 20 years, and 6 of those years, coming on 7, has been with FCSS. And I know you guys have an FCSS in Edmonton. And so my role is to, or it has been to, kind of act as the middleman. So we receive money from the province, and we delegate that money to community agencies as is kind of recognized as a need per community. So each community is very different. Each FCSS runs very differently. And kind of a bit of a I guess what I'm going to talk to you about this morning is the development of a framework. So we're into the research piece, but it's very early days. And I think the reason for that, and the reason that it took a good 6 or 7 years to get there, is because we wanted to do things properly. And in acknowledging that, like I said, Dr. Boder back there was involved, as well as a group of elders. So we had Leon Maskwachis was involved with us. Reg Croshu, who I know is presenting tomorrow morning here from Treaty 7. Doreen Spence, Métis Elder in Calgary. Case Eagle speaker was also from Calgary. Leon Cranebear and Patrick Daigneault, who I saw in the audience, or saw him outside. So they all played a real strong role in, I think, sort of creating a strong foundation from which we, as a funder, would work with community. So one of the, when I sort of go back to my history with the municipal government, I've always worked in community, I've always worked in Indigenous programming somehow. And when I took on the role of funder, social planner, I went away for mat leave. And when I came back, I realized the whole program had changed, and it was changed in a way that didn't really work for our community. It was very much based in best practices, promising practices, and literature that was standardized. And I think the most interesting sort of piece too is when I came back, so what happens is if you apply for funding, if we do an RFP, we have a series of research briefs that sort of guide our thinking about what we'd like to see. There was no Indigenous research brief at all. And so I came back and I had a month to kind of pull it all together. So we did the best we could or in early days, and then realizing that we needed to do more. And I think in working with the agencies, I have 15 programs, so I don't have a lot of programs out of the 117 that we fund, but we always knew that we needed to do things differently, and we needed for the funder and government to acknowledge that, and that was very, very important. And I think that, I'm just going to turn my slide here. So we went on this journey, and like I said, it's been a good 6 years, and we did it slowly. I think that when we first started talking, I remember being in a meeting at Awatan. It's a shelter up in Calgary, and I remember Josie Nepanak saying that, you know, what is it that's different about the programs that we offer? And we need to respect and acknowledge that, and we need to be able to tell that story, and we need to talk about that, and the funder and the government needs to be supportive of that, and we need to do it in a different way. And I'll sort of get into some of the specific work around that, but I think the biggest issue that we wanted to be able to speak to is that when, as a funder, we provide money to the community, to community agencies, we want to make sure that it's done in the best possible and culturally respectful way. And so how would we be able to do that in a very broad and mainstream kind of practice framework, as most funders do? There's sort of one way to do things, and that's it, and we didn't want to do that. I think the other thing we wanted to talk about is that we wanted to make sure that whatever was designed, the tools that were designed, which is kind of what I'm going to talk to you about today, were designed, implemented, and evaluated from an Indigenous perspective, from Indigenous community, from elders, from knowledge holders, all the people that we know work in the community, and acknowledging the strengths of participants and what we know works. Because I think what we do know is what has always been used has not worked. And so how can we move past that, right? Like I said, we had elders involved. We had Ralph and Dr. Maskwachis were involved in some of the work, and my sister in Calgary, Joanne Pino, who's another AT lady that I work with, was highly involved. And what we came up with, and there's a few of them outside. I've burned them on a disc for folks, but if people want them, the tools I can get more to you, is a research brief that was, I think, reflective of Indigenous perspective, and a set of survey questions that we use now, not only to sort of see where the program's at, but also drive the program content. And I'll go into that a little bit more. So like I said, you know, we needed to translate. And I've worked a lot with Dr. Reg Croshu over the last 2 or 3 years, and he talks a lot about translation, and that how we don't want to combine things, because when we combine things, it doesn't work. We have to be respectful and acknowledge our own ways. And so when we looked at prevention, like I said, our general framework talks about prevention from one paradigm, and that didn't work for us. So that didn't work. When we talked about preventative programs, again, we were looking at, and the other briefs are built on, peer-reviewed journals. We didn't have a lot of that, and it's not to say that we don't have that knowledge, but it wasn't written in that way. It wasn't written in that framework. And again, I think that a lot of the best practice, we really didn't want to just sort of drop in stuff, because it has to be built by community, and it has to be built from an Indigenous perspective, an Indigenous value base. So what we came up with was moving away from best and promising practices to healing practices, and that's the core foundation of anything that is funded by FCSS now. A lot of the material was taken from the Aboriginal Healing Foundation documents. We kind of went through almost everything. I have them all in my house. There's a big shelf of stuff. And really, like as it says there, that we're looking for models, approaches, and techniques that are based on Aboriginal or Indigenous experiences and feel right to survivors and families, and that result in positive change. So that is now the foundation of our funding journey, and really when we look at programs, that's what we want to see. I think the other big thing that we did was we went from looking at funding as prevention to healing, but also to looking at root causes. Like I said, over my time at the city and my work in community, I would sit at many community tables, and whether we were talking about homelessness or youth issues or whatnot, it all seemed to come down to a core issue. And so what was happening that was different for us, and something that we needed to acknowledge as a funder. And so what we got to understand is that, and I think we knew this, but like I said again, as a funder, we needed to acknowledge that really we're talking about trauma, identity, social inclusion or exclusion, and effects of residential school, and I think that's something very much like what these ladies just talked about, and narcissists as well. And so we're really now looking at root causes, and we're acknowledging the impact of residential school and the history of Canada on our community and on our people. This is, I call this my daisy model. It just reminds me of a flower, but again, I think that gives you another kind of visual of what we're trying to do. And so we're trying to work with community, and we're trying to provide programming for that middle section. So again, residential school impact, intergenerational trauma, social inclusion or exclusion, and that can be from within your own culture and your own identity, or from the general population and identity. So working with people around identity rebuilding. And yeah, so the outside petals really demonstrate that, I have a lot of different programs that look at the core issues and very much integrate some of the practices of the Healing Foundation around, the use of culture and the bringing back of culture into programming, as well as historical knowledge, so understanding the history of Canada and how that impacts people, and also some clinical approaches if it's appropriate. But really, my programs can fit in any of those sort of categories. So I have, like I said, I work with domestic violence, with youth programming, with young children, with parenting, all kinds of different entry points, but really with a focus on the root causes. This is just a quick, if you're interested in the brief itself, it's very large. Somebody was talking about the concept of being dense. It's fairly dense, and the reason that I wanted it to be that way is because if you look on our website, you'll see that the majority of the other briefs are about 10 pages long. Ours is about 40, and a big part of the preamble, like the piece of the brief, is about our history and acknowledging our history, because my argument, my soapbox is that if you're going to work with our community, and I really don't like the word programming, I don't think we're offering programs, but as a funder, that's how we talk. I think that we're rebuilding and bringing back who we are as people, and we're offering, if we're going to do that as a program, you better know about the history of Aboriginal people in this country. So a lot of the front end of it talks about residential school and all of the different eras and things that happened to us as people. And so that's a big piece of the front end of the brief. We also talk about what community knows, and this was a big issue for me right from the get-go when I came back to work, is that we were relying so heavily on documents. And for a lot of what we know works, we don't record it and we don't want to record it. But we know that there are people out there doing good work that have really good lived experience and have good, that are ceremonialists. They're people, they're elders, they're people that we go to for help. And we're never going to necessarily record that as a best practice, but that's out there. So how can we bring in people's personal experiences, programming experiences, the value of culture, language, and the value of elders in combination with what we know in literature? Because I think literature is also important, but it can't stand alone. So how do we approach elders? How do programs integrate that into what we offer to community? The next part talks about those core issues, and there's a lot of information. And like I said, if you want to read it, it's online. That kind of goes into, for people that are interested in running or working in programming, about trauma, about residential school, identity loss and social inclusion or exclusion, and what that means for us and how we understand that. And we really tried to translate as much as we could. And it's kind of funny, right? Like a lot of the terminology that we use, like social inclusion, we didn't, so when we looked for that as a word search, we didn't find that because we don't talk about that, right? We talk about other things. And so as much as we could bring in other terms or talk about things that were meaningful to us, we did that. So that's that piece there. And then at the end, we do talk about some healing practices. So, hold on there, okay. We give people an idea of some, I wouldn't say they're not drop-in programs, because that's not what we want to do, but some ideas around how they can start to look at what's worked for different people. So there's a particular section on urban. In Calgary, like I said, I work in Calgary, we have a very huge diverse mix of Indigenous people there. So what works in an urban setting for Métis people, for youth, for women, and in particular for men. I think a lot of times in programming our men are missing, and so we would like to give people some ideas about what works for men, because I think it's uniquely different than for other people. I just want to give a quick example of one program that we've piloted for the last 3 years. It's called Braiding the Sweetgrass, and it was really, we had an RFP that was open, and the brief was available at the time, and we really wanted to see how we could start to do this in a purposeful way. One of the things that we did talk about as well when we were developing this is that it's not that our agencies don't do this, but they're doing it sort of at the side of their desk, and we really wanted it to be the core of what we're doing in the community. So there's a program called Braiding the Sweetgrass. It's being run out of Hull Services. And we really, they've been in pilot mode for 3 years, and they've learned an amazing amount of stuff along the way. And I think the biggest thing that they have learned is how to integrate, like I said, those 3 pillars. So culture, bringing culture in, it's very strongly based. One of the people that work with the program, he said to me, that Hull has always been a clinical program with a little bit of culture, but this has turned the whole thing on its head, and now that it's truly a cultural program with a little bit of clinical intervention as needed. But they really rely heavily on, I think they have 12 elders that work with the program. They go out with community, they integrate an understanding of the history of residential school, all of the sort of core issues, helping people understand where their parenting approaches might be coming from, and they do some clinical work if they need it, but a big piece of it is culture. And we did an evaluation of the program, and the people have said basically that it's been life-changing for them. So, we kind of have a bit of a model that we're working with, and we're trying to work with the other agencies to bring that in. So the other piece that goes, and this is, like I said, that sort of created the framework from which we're moving forward. It took a while because we wanted to make sure it was as right as it could be at the time. And I think the other sister piece to it is the measurement piece. As a funder, we have to, I have a problem with measurement, but when we provide money to programs, we do need to see sort of what's happening, right? So it was a huge struggle, and Ralph can attest to this, trying to blend a funder's need for quantitative data with qualitative storytelling and telling the whole story about what's happening and why cultural programming works for us. So this was a bit of a journey as well. And again, at the onset, one of the things that we all sat together and we said, okay, we know what we're doing is different. And why do Indigenous people come to Indigenous programming? What is it that's different about what we do? And we want to acknowledge and expand on that. And we wanted that to really be the measurement that that links to the work, right? So there were 5 categories that or ideas that came out. Aboriginal identity was one, social exclusion, effects of residential school, cultural and spirituality, and family dynamics and gender role. That's what people generally thought was unique to Indigenous programming. And so what we did, and I was banned from the meetings, and which is good because I do work, that's my job, right? I really wanted the surveys to be built by community. So Ralph and Leona worked with all of my agencies for years and years and years. And I think blending in what we saw from literature with elders' perspective and with lived experience is what built the questions. So, for example, and I'm just going to show you some results. So like I said, we're really early in the day right now in terms of seeing what is happening, but survey 47, for example, there are 13 surveys that are available and that can be used. In this particular case, there was 109 pre and post tests. This is done by a t-test. I'm not a quantitative research person, but I'm told that's what the research people use. This just shows you that, demographically we have a lot of First Nations people in our programming. But what I'm really happy to see, because this was a bit of a leap of faith, and I was told after that nobody really believed this was going to happen within my work unit. But so when we got the results of the cultural programming that are being sort of looked at from a cultural lens in terms of the surveys, I'll just read one of the questions to you, for example. So one of the questions in this survey here is, I understand cultural teachings and practices and how to use them to help me make choices if I'm faced with a problem is one question. And one of the other ones is, I have been involved in traditional cultural, social events and ceremonies such as powwow, smudging, pipe ceremonies, sweat lodges, or Métis ceremonies. Like, these are the kind of questions that people are asked. And then the hope is that the program will help people in this manner, right? So we have like 30% change over time, 25%, 21, like really, really big numbers. So that's sort of where we're at now. Like I said, here's another survey, survey 48, and like again, big, big change for people as a result. We believe, having been involved with the elders, with the culture, that kind of stuff. So I think what's next is like I said, we pilot tested them. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Hold on, back. We had 6 new surveys created. They were finalized this June. They're going to be able to be, they're accessible to folks to use now, starting in January. And if you can't see them, understanding traditional community-based parenting practices. In the past, what we had were surveys that were based on like triple P, sort of mainstream parenting. So now what we're saying to people is, we have such great knowledge around, and we have knowledge that we know is beneficial to our communities, and so how can we acknowledge that? So there's the traditional parenting survey, there's again, understanding history as a part of healing, understanding ceremony, accessing ceremony for healing. And so we're hoping that people will embrace these this part of the wheel, of the medicine wheel. I see it very much as a medicine wheel. And so this, offers now a way to acknowledge and really encourage programming that brings in elders, brings in ceremony, and that we can talk about that. So that's what's coming next. I don't have any data yet, but I think the other thing that I would like to do is, right now we have bar charts and that kind of stuff. I'd like to fill in the story, very much like what you ladies are talking about. So what does it mean? As a funder, we need the metrics, but I would like to tell the rest of the story. So I think that that's the next big opportunity, and to be able to share that, share with people the value of culture and the value of ceremony, and bringing in that as a core part of programming, or as, not programming, resurgence for us as a people. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'll leave it at that, because I know that you wanted to maybe open up some time for questions, but yeah, thank you very much.
Is it really only 8 minutes until lunch? Yeah. Okay. Oh, maybe they're giving me 8 minutes to speak. Okay. So does anybody have any burning questions for these ladies? Bernadette.
I want to thank you for sharing your stories. I just, I'm one of these people that would say you have to know where you're from. It's important to know who you are, where you come from, what happened, and where you're going. But one of the things that I really got is the profoundness of your research itself. But one of the things that really intrigues me is that how do we ensure that children in care, when they go back home, that they have that opportunity to really have people like yourselves, other people, to come and tell them their story. Because one of the biggest things is that, going back to my own community, it was very, very difficult, because 50% of the population remembered who I was. The other 50% were afraid of who I was. And it was really, and I see this continuously with our children that are raised in child welfare. And so for them to go back home, there are times where they're not welcomed, or they're not accepted, or they don't know their families, and or the community. And so we end up with some of our children, adult children, who end up on the streets, who end up being angry. We see the overrepresentation of adult children in prison system. We see them in EYOC. We see some of them on the streets. So we have a population that is growing, and they have to leave child welfare. And so this transition that needs to take place, how do we do that when sometimes some of these children are not being recognized? And, I see the strength that you ladies have, and I would like to believe that, our children have a place to go to after they leave child welfare. Because I myself, I went back home, I was probably 39 years old. And it was the most difficult journey for me. You spoke about not knowing your language, right? And the difficulty of, if you don't have that language, sometimes you get laughed at, sometimes you get ridiculed, sometimes, you're not accepted. There's a conversation going on, you're going like, oh my God, what are they talking about? Are they talking about me? But that's what I worry about, like in my line of work that I do with some of our families that we work with, about that transition that needs to happen back home in their families. And I just wanted to, the lady that did the FCSS, I wish that in Edmonton they would have that same kind of teaching, because I feel sometimes that our communities are not being heard, and I really, appreciated that. But I guess my question is that, what do we do with our children that are aging out, and how do we welcome them back in the community? Who are the pillars that will bring those together? Because we have another generation who are exiting out of child welfare.
Thank you for your question, Bernadette. I don't have a clear answer, but one thing I always remember my late father used to say is that when you go to a community, you always look for the people who are the doers in the community. And often that would be, he would say, like the old ladies, right? There's always somebody in the community that's strong, and to work at that level. Because I always believe that when we work in building a foundation, we'll have strength. I also think as Indigenous people, we need to challenge ourselves to work together. And somehow we have to make connections for the good of these children, because we understand that pain of not belonging, of being excluded from band membership, from government, from institutions. We know all too well what that feels like, to not be welcomed. So for me, I challenge myself to stay open, to support wherever we can. But I think it is really important that we put our egos aside and work for the betterment of our people. And so in whatever way that, you know, that can happen, I think we just have to put our collective minds together and our collective hearts. And somehow it will work. Somehow it will make a difference. And I thank you for the work that you continue to do. So hi to you.
I was just going to say, in terms of this work in Calgary, I'm happy to come out. I'm happy to come to events like this and kind of spread the word. I know Ralph is spreading the word up here. And it's interesting. I remember when I first started at FCSS, because we're all over the place. We're in settlements. We're the only program in Alberta. And yet, when I first started, because I knew that this had to happen, but I thought, okay, surely there must be other models out there. There was nothing. So I would be happy to share with other funders, with other FCSSs, if it's of interest to people up in Edmonton, if it can help you on your way. I'm happy to share it. So.
Thanks, Sharon.
I guess the only piece that comes to me right away is I have learned through my journey that research impacts theory, theory impacts policy, policy impacts lives. So I think just seeing that formula in my mind, you know, how can we bridge those gaps between research and theory and policy? Because ultimately, that's why we're all here, is a connection to one of those areas. So I think that's the challenge, is to see and how that formula can help move our communities forward. Yeah. Thanks, Bernadette. Hi.
Other questions for our panel members?
Thanks. Diane Conrad from the University of Alberta, and I'm still thinking how to frame this question. I guess I'm struck, Sharon, by first your comment that you're not a measurement person. I'm the same. I don't trust numbers. I'm also struck by your statement about as funders, we need the metrics. And so I always wonder, so who decided that? Who decided that the numbers speak more powerfully than the stories that we're hearing today? And I know funders continue to rely on those numbers, whereas, you know, they do nothing for me. And I know there's lots of other people who don't understand and don't find them meaningful. So I'm wondering, why do the funders continue to ask for those numbers? And why can we not convince them that the stories speak for themselves?
I would love to have the stories speak for themselves. You know, regardless of having this new kind of framework, so in my case, and again, all funders are different, but in my case, our board is city council, and they're very business-minded. And it's changed over time. Like when I first started, we were not so worried about cost-benefit analysis. But now, right at this point, we very much are. And so in developing this, I knew that it had to work for, you know, for my bosses, basically, because they want to see the effect. Whether or not you can see it through, you know, a t-test is another story, you know, another question, right? But that's what they needed. But what I needed to have more so was to have something that worked for community so that we could tell our stories in a way. And, you know, I think Ralph can attest to this. One of our biggest struggles was to try to put people's lived knowledge and quantitative measurement and the ability to talk about something into a Likert scale. And so we did the best we could. I think it works as best it can for both parties, but I think it's, again, in the application, because if you do look at the surveys, they're very different. They're evocative, and they actually, so when we first created the surveys, we tested them with the agencies, and they agreed to do it. And what we found is not only did the surveys mean something different for the folks that were coming into the program, it made them feel welcome, because it talked about something that meant something to them, right, their lived experience. But we didn't, like, people, when they go to the programs that I fund, these programs, they don't just get a survey on a piece of paper, like on a clipboard, and you just fill it out. They're done in a learning circle or a teaching circle or a talking circle, and it's done in a way to introduce the program or the topic so that it's safe for people. So, on the one hand, we report back to our city council, we give them the numbers, the stats, so they're happy with that. But for me, I want more. I want to be able to tell the story. I want to be able to talk about what that means, really. Because I think that, the numbers look good, but that's just, anybody can make an assumption. It means something for you, it means something different for me. So I want to put the story around it. And I guess that's just me getting my way, right, around the qualitative piece of it and the storytelling piece. But that was what I would say in terms of who wants it. Yeah. And that may change, I don't know, but right now, that's how it is.
Do we have other questions from the audience? Any questions from the webcast viewers, Andy? Okay, we have 8 minutes left. What I'm going to do is invite you all to have some conversation at your tables for the next 8 minutes, and I'm going to give you an assignment. I would like you to think about what you've heard this morning and ask yourself if you had an aha moment, or if you had an epiphany, or if you heard something that stood out for you. And I'd like you to take one of those sticky pieces of paper and write down what that was. What stood out for you? What do you understand now, or what do you question more? What's your aha moment? And then I'm going to ask you, when you go for lunch, if you can please take that sticky and post it outside the doors on the banner that invites your aha or epiphany moments. So feel free to share with people at the table what you felt that aha moment was, and then record it and post it. And when you're done, we will have lunch and reconvene at 1 o'clock. So thank you, and please join me in providing our guests one more round of applause. Thank you.